Well, picking up kind of where we left off 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago I got into an introduction of the book of James. Planning on trying to preach through it, and we'll be taking some breaks here and there because of holidays or whatever maybe, or other things that need to come up that need to be addressed. But that time, 3 weeks ago, I talked about the author, James himself, kind of who he was, which James was in the Bible, and because there's about 3 or 4 different Jameses mentioned in the Bible, and which James they think that it was. We know it wasn't James, the brother of John, the son of Zebedee, because he was killed, but plus we know it wasn't him. But in some more of the introduction, Martin Luther, called the book of James a strawy epistle, because if you look for salvation, you don't find it in the book of James. And it gets to be kind of sticky when you read it, talking about works and different things, about controlling the tongue. It gets to be a little sticky and prickly at times to each person. But that's because when James was writing, he wasn't writing like Paul was, addressing salvation and how to be saved, because Paul was writing more to the Gentiles, people that were not of Jewish birth or did not belong to the Jewish temple. James, on the other hand, specifically says in the first verse, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Right there it tells you he is writing to Jews, people from Jerusalem that had been scattered abroad due to sackings and destructions of the city of Jerusalem, such as like what's talked about in the book of Daniel and others. But this does not include the AD 70 destruction of the temple by the Romans, because James was written a few years before that. They didn't even know that was going to take place. But James is writing to the Jews that had been scattered through the diaspora, where they were expelled from Jerusalem, taken as captives to other countries, other cities, and remained behind once they were allowed to go back to Jerusalem, or they, like we do, moved of their own free will for whatever reasons. And that's who this, even though this was addressed to that specific group, it still applies to us today. And it applies to the church. Okay. In James, in the first verse, James 1:1, it's the greeting, salutation. It says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. James identifies himself to the 12 tribes. He says he's a servant. what does that word mean, to be a servant? This particular James, we believe, was the head of the church after Pentecost. And that's based on some of the stuff that takes place in Acts. We believe that this is that James. And he says he's a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. In the Greek, the word used there that's been translated as servant, doulos, means more of a bond servant or bondmaid or bondman. In other words, he is bonded to God and to the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, what does it mean when people say they are a bondman or bondmaid, bondservant? What does that mean? Some other translations translate that word as slave, but that does not have the exact connotation that is used here. Because slavery, enslave, for us today, brings up a connotation of the events that happened like back in 1700 and 1800s that we've had a civil war over. We're still fighting today, and there's still aspects of it going on where people are treated as property, beaten, whipped, and just totally mistreated and looked at as they're not human. They're not the same as me, and they're not human. But that is not what James is portraying here. If you have a Bible that says a slave, it does not mean a slave that gets whipped and has to do what the master says, or a zombie where it's yes, master, I will do your bidding. It's not that either. Bondservant can be thought more of in the form of an apprentice. Back in the 1800s, and even earlier, and maybe even some today, people would take their child and go to another person, say he was a printer or basket maker, tent maker, whatever, and they would bargain with the professional and make a deal where he would take that child, teach them the craft of whatever it was, printing or whatever, while they lived with them also, in exchange for money maybe or whatever. So, and a lot of times they said they were apprenticed to a person. And what that meant was they would go and work and do the bidding of the master, but yet they also still had free time and time to do things away from the job. And that's more of what this is what he's describing here is he is a servant. He is serving God, doing the will of God, doing the will of the Lord Jesus Christ. He is serving at their pleasure. in the military, officers serve at the pleasure of the president. The president could send a letter out saying, this person is fired. He no longer serves as an officer of the military at my pleasure. And he would have to leave. And as I'm a servant, I am a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm also a servant of Corinth Baptist Church. I serve at y'all's pleasure. Y'all can tell me to leave whenever you wanted to, and I'd have to leave. But as long as I'm serving at y'all's pleasure and I'm serving God and the Lord Jesus Christ, it is part of my responsibility and duty to point this church and to its members, to point everyone to God and to the Lord Jesus Christ. And so that is what he's talking about. Now, to break it on down even further, not only is it my job to point y'all to God and the Lord Jesus Christ, but it is also my duty and responsibility to encourage y'all when you go out into the world to point others to God and to Lord Jesus Christ and the hope and promises of Jesus. And then y'all are going out as servants, serving God in that capacity. And that is what James is trying to point out here. It is as we are servants. And then, as I mentioned earlier, to the 12 tribes, and I went into that, of who the people were. Now, we're not specifically to go out and address the 12 tribes, but we are to go out into the world, as it says in Matthew, and serve God by teaching and making disciples. And that's what Tony and Karen are doing. They've gone out into the world. They've gone to Jamaica. They're going as servants of God to present the hope of Jesus Christ and to make disciples of other nations. And that is how the gospel is spread. And that is how we need to be. We need to go out. And it doesn't have to be to a foreign country. It can be to our neighbors next door or down the street.
In your own house.
In your own house sometimes. Yes. Wherever we are to present the gospel. We are to present God and to serve God in whatever we do. And so, that is what James is saying in this first verse. He is a servant. He was presenting God. He was working for Jesus and God. But he was a servant, and he was serving the church of Jerusalem. And as we go forth, it is my duty, like I said, to point to the cross, to God, to Jesus, and keep y'all focused on that so that when you go out, you point others to those same things. And we're to go into all the world, as Matthew says. And so, as we get ready to close, if you want to make a rededication of your life, or have something that's pressing on you and you want to pray about, I'll be down here in front, waiting to receive you. Or if you would like to join our church here, I'll be down here in front as we get ready to sing.